Welcome to the UK Scriptwriters Podcast with me, Danny Stack.
And me, Tim Clegg, and a special guest today as well.
Special guest today is a co-writer of the Mad Max Fury Road film, Brendan McCarthy. Thank you, Brendan, for joining us. Hello.
Hey there. You're welcome.
All right, Brendan. Brendan's calling us live, if you like, from Ireland, where he is at the minute, on his phone. So please, listeners, excuse any kind of audio blips and dropout bits and so on. But I think it'll be all right, and we're so excited to talk to him, we don't care.
Yeah, it was a very easy win for us, this interview, Brendan, because you got in contact with us and said, how about it, fellas? So we were like, only too glad to accommodate.
Yeah, well, I'm doing my bit for the Mad Max Golden Globe and Oscar push.
Well, yeah. And well, obviously, Mr. George Miller getting all the due attention that he deserves, but we like to focus on the hidden gems of the film, which is obviously the writers all the time. So, you know, Mad Max, Film of the Year for me, 2015. Congratulations. It must be very exciting to work on a project like that. I'm sure we have plenty of interesting or even geeky things to ask you about it.
Right.
So I suppose just generally...
Yeah, how did it come about? Because tell us a little bit about your really interesting and quite varied career, and how did you get to working on the new Mad Max?
Right. Well, I've been a lifetime Mad Max fan. I enjoyed the first one. In those days, in order to see Mad Max films, you had to go to what were known as the midnight special screenings, which were basically in porn theatres dotted around London.
Yeah.
So I saw the first Mad Max on a midnight screening with The Cars That Ate Paris as a double bill. And that kind of gave me a sort of feeling for the sort of the slightly surreal Australian vehicle movies. I thought that was, you know, you sort of look at it and think, well, that was a pretty strange double bill retrospectively. And it was around the time when you saw stuff like Eraserhead and The Hills of Eyes and, you know, all that kind of slightly left field cult stuff. And Mad Max, and although Mad Max was more of a kind of revenge movie, it was sold like that, it had a quality about it that was very accomplished for a guy's first film. And tonally it had something going on with it as well. I actually was in Australia when I saw Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, and that blew me away. And that really, you know, it's kind of like one of those epiphany moments when you sort of think, hang on a minute, there's something going on here. And in those days, you know, pre-VHS, it was hard, you know, you had to wait a year for a film to come out on video. So the only way you could see a movie if you liked it was go and see it again in the cinema. So I went back to see Mad Max 2 about 20 times, you know, each time, you know, paying to get in. Because I felt a compulsion to kind of solve how they'd done it. How had George Miller put together this film that seemed so perfect and radical and edgy? I mean, in its day, Road Warrior was the equivalent of something like The Matrix. You know, it was an era-defining film that changed stuff, particularly in the action genre, and remained the high watermark of action movies until Fury Road, really. As I was in Australia, and I became kind of slightly obsessed with Mad Max, not to the point of being a stalker, but just interested in the kind of creatively how they'd accomplished it. I managed to track down different writers, people involved in the production, and met everybody attached to it except George Miller. And so I sent him in my work a few times over the years, and you know, Thunderdome came out, which kind of impressed me less, but nonetheless had some good stuff in it. And as the years went by, you know, I kind of, you know, Mad Max faded from people's radar. I still felt a strong interest in it. Thought, well, there's got to be a better movie than Thunderdome to be told on Mad Max. And so I wrote to George Miller a few times, and what happened is that I got involved in the beginning, at the very earliest days of long-form computer animation, pre-Pixar, and I did a TV series in Canada called Reboot, which was like the first, as I say, long-form computer animation material. And I did an episode of it, which I created, which was a pastiche of Mad Max, and I sent it to George, and his production company phoned up and said, "Do you want to meet up? George is going to be in Hollywood in a few weeks," and so I made sure I was in Hollywood as well, and I met him, and we had a great chat about Mad Max. And really, I was just trying to get over to him that another visit to the wasteland, would be appreciated. I had some ideas and talked to him about them, and I got a phone call about 3 or 4 months later saying, "Why don't you come over to Australia and knock about some ideas with George? He's kind of pretty excited about doing a new Mad Max film now," and that's how it started.
When was that? Because I know there's been a few false starts.
A long time ago. That was 17 years ago.
I was thinking, he's probably thinking, isn't that weirdo from 30 years ago who sent me all this fan mail?
Yeah.
But no, it was already 20 years ago almost. All right.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I wasn't, I think the thing is, if you have some talent and if you've got something to say, people don't dismiss it. If it's just, can I have a shaving of Mel Gibson's leather jacket, please? They're going to, I think, loony.
Well, it's interesting hearing that, Brendan, because it sounds like it comes from, a passionate fan point of view from your kind of starting point with Mad Max. That in this day and age, it would probably be a documentary on Netflix or something about you sending stuff to George Miller and being really passionate about Mad Max.
But I was sending him stuff once every 5 years. It wasn't like every week.
Yeah. Okay.
But what were you
doing? I had something to send. I'd done this really funny pastiche of Mad Max called Bad Bob, and we sent it to him. And at that time, people weren't particularly au fait with computer animation. As I say, it was pre-Toy Story. So he was interested straight away technically in what we were doing. And so when I met him, the conversation initially was about computer animation. What is it? What does it cost? How are you doing this stuff? And at that point, the company I was working for, Mainframe, who were the leading CGI people, as I say, because Pixar hadn't hit yet, we were getting stuff like, say, Shrek. When it was Chris Farley as Shrek, and they were going to do it as a stop frame Shrek, but with computer animated backgrounds, we got sent the script to see whether or not we would provide the computer animated backgrounds. Okay. So, it was kind of, it was swilling around before Pixar just focused it all up with Toy Story and said, a feature film can work. And then DreamWorks got themselves, focused into an animation studio. Then it all took off. But this was the sort of 5 years before all that was going on. I mean, we even had, just funny enough, just today, obviously, we heard David Bowie died. But David Bowie, when he saw Reboot, the TV series, got in touch with our studio and came up and visited and wanted to know all about computer animation because he was really hot on the internet. And, as you know, he was a very technically savvy guy and very forward looking. And he wanted to, essentially he was going to talk about doing a video with using our techniques for one of his songs. So he actually came up and visited the studio.
What I like about you, Brendan, and what you've described there, and what I've read about you as well, is that you're not a kind of guy that's just, and don't take this the wrong way, but you're not like a full-time writer, as in you're just sitting there writing. You're doing all these other things too, designing, like you say, getting involved in new technologies, which I like as well. How do you describe yourself? And do you see all that as being one thing? Do you try and put things into little boxes? How do you see your career?
Well, I have a lot of problems. I don't have a lot of problems. Let me rephrase that. I have a problem with, say, interacting with Hollywood because I do lots of different things. I mean, I went to Hollywood just after the premiere of the Mad Max film as part of your usual writing deal. And I thought, well, I'll go and go around and visit a few agents and see if I can kind of land a decent agent on the back of Fury Road. But the reaction I got was so bizarre. You just sort of like start bashing your head against the wall. Because it's saying, so let me get this right. You're a writer, but you're also a designer. So what are you? And you think, well, I'm both. But apparently you can't be both. You have to be one or the other. I then even had it broken down to, so let me get this right. You write live action movies like Mad Max, but also you write animation. So which are you, animation or live action? You go, well, I'm both. It's but you can't be both. We have to market you to something. And you sort of think, you just sort of... So really, I've had to steer away from all that stuff because a talent like mine doesn't slot into just the usual boxes. So I've had a whole career from just interacting. Usually I get on well with directors, producers, people like that who actually make movies and generally not interact with some of the apparatus of Hollywood, as it were. So, that brings its problems. But at the same time, when you're actually dealing with creative people, most directors I've dealt with, from George Miller to David Lynch, Ridley Scott, all these kinds of people, they get it straight away because they're kind of like that themselves.
Yeah,
they're storytellers.
That's
they're
right.
storytellers who write bits and do visuals and understand visual effects. That's their job.
Yeah.
So, I immediately get on with those guys and we speak the same language. When I deal with something like an agent, that's like I'm talking to almost like an accountant or something, a completely different sort of language.
No, I'm glad you said that. Let me throw out a statement to you that you can disagree with or agree with or whatever. But having a strong design background and what we might call an eye on visual storytelling for your works on comics and so on, do you think that led to the visual strength of the story of Mad Max, which is very light on dialogue but massively strong on visual storytelling? That's my statement.
Yeah.
See if you agree with it.
Yep, I absolutely agree with it. And one of the biggest problems we have, say for example, with the awards and people perceiving screenwriting, is that because there's not a lot of dialogue in Mad Max. This is how crude it gets. I'm sorry to say, but with a movie like Fury Road, where you've got a screenplay which has a small amount of dialogue in it, people tend to dismiss the screenplay and think, well, there was only 20 lines of dialogue, Yet every single moment in Fury Road was scripted, which is why we both decided to go down the road of storyboarding as the method of writing, because you can't actually realistically verbally describe action. You have to visually represent it. It's much better to do it that way. So people don't really understand that the screenplay, the hybrid form of the screenplay, which was a kind of like a 3,000 frame comic book, really. So it's been quite a strange thing. People want to see a giant written traditional script, and people like George Miller who've been doing it for 40 years. Just say scripts like that he thinks are redundant.
Well, that's really fascinating to me, Brendan, because I'm a bit of a script geek, and I love dissecting screenplays and seeing the structure and all the rest of it. And when I watch Mad Max, I see it as something that really is very intensely structured and very pinpoint in what it's doing. And even with some lines of dialogue, which I might be reading more into than it was intended. But I'm wondering, from what you said there, was there ever a traditional script for Mad Max, or was it just you and the team developing that kind of storyboard and action?
No, first, the process was I met George, we bounced around a load of ideas. George had a core idea, which I then developed with him, and we got it was about a 100-minute story. We then, for about a year, went through that story and just worked it over. And as we went through it, I would sketch mainly design ideas and what characters look like and what the vehicles would look like and what the environments look like as we went along. So we kind of got an idea of what the movie looked like overall. And this was a kind of prose, bits of dialogue, bits of drawings, all put together into a document that ran for about 100 pages. Right, once that was locked down and we had the ending and, lots of stuff changed radically and, endings changed and characters got lost and new ones came along. After we sorted it all out, we then set about doing a definitive version of what we'd just written, which was the storyboard version, and we then imported into the storyboard dialogue, wrote new dialogue, got rid of old dialogue, just the standard way of working, except we were working... often, for example, we would draw, say, maybe a 10-minute sequence in storyboard form. Me and George would sit down, work the shots out, and a couple of other storyboard artists had joined us by then, and then we'd render up all the storyboards. George would go off and do something else. I think he was working on Happy Feet, beginning that. He'd come back, and we'd have cut out all the little frames of the storyboards on a giant desk bin. And he'd sit down, and he'd look at all the cuts. So what he was looking at were the cuts of the movie, and he'd move them around. He'd take ones out. He'd do a little scribble to say, I need another shot here. And so the script was written as much in that way as it was sitting in with a keyboard and typing out words. You know, because of my way of working, I'd always been put off writing screenplays because I thought it just means sitting in a room on my own, writing, bashing away on a typewriter, which I find boring. So I'm much more interested in the way I naturally fell into a way of working with George that, you know, we both work. That's how we naturally work. So.
Great. And there was a third co-writer as well, wasn't there, Nico?
Yeah, Nico came on about... I spent 2 years on the movie, then wrote another film with George, a computer-animated feature film, which I spent another couple of years on. Worked around George for about 5 years overall. When I left, Nico came on. Nico is a dramaturg in that he was... George brought him in just to kind of look at the whole script, and he'd known Nico for years, and Nico was actually an actor who'd been in Mad Max #1. So Nico looked at the whole script, sort of brought certain things to his attention. Thematically, this could be strengthened if we, you know, add bits here, and this is a bit of a red herring, why don't we just phase it out, you know. But by then I'd left, I'm just aware of what Nico did, and Nico came back, and as the film took so long to get made, another 10 years, Nico would come back and revisit the place when it would get green lit again. George would employ Nico and he'd come back on again and do a bit more streamlining. The final film you see is about 80% of what I wrote with George.
Right.
And what George and Nico then refined and came up with some great stuff that seemed so blindingly obvious when you see the film, but we didn't. When myself and George were doing it, we didn't see it. For example, the control of the population in the Citadel by water was not something we'd worked out. We had another device, and obviously, I guess through new conversations, Nico and George said, really, he should be pumping up water, and that's how he controls the population, because you've got to control them somehow. So he's got an ideology for controlling war boys, which is, you know, a critique of the standard, you know, death for glory, etc. But also he has to control the commodities. If that became the theme of the movie, the control of commodities, he has to control the water, the most basic, and then the human body itself. So once the theme of the film became obvious, then Nico was able to focus certain bits of it that needed sharpening, and did a very nice job on that.
It's a fantastic way of working to me, anyway, because that's just sounds so visual. Like I say,
it's like previs.
Yeah, exactly. When you watch the film now, how close would you say it is to the storyboard, or was that storyboard in essence an inspiration, and then obviously things on set and different cameras and new technologies would have changed anyway, and techniques come and go. So actually, it's moved quite a bit further on since the storyboard.
No, it's about 90% to the storyboards, and there's a 10% addition, which, as you say, stuff that was on the hoof when they were shooting it. You know, second. I mean, there was some interesting stuff that went on that you're probably not aware of, and but in the middle of the shoot, Warner Brothers decided that the Citadel sequences were too expensive, and they would just do the movie starting with her turning off the road, and they'd cut out the front and end bookends of the film. And this was like, I was just thinking, holy Christ! You know, George invited me over to Africa to watch the shoot, and you know, that just happened, and it was like really threw everybody a wrench into everything. So we were all starting to think about, right, how do we then make this work? But George, strange enough, had a lot of calm about it, because he knew that they didn't have a movie without those bookends. And by the time he delivered this amazing footage, Warner's went, actually, you're right. So we're now going to... So that's the shoots in Sydney that followed the shoot in Africa. That was reported as reshoots. But they weren't reshoots. They were actually the stuff that was originally planned to be shot, featuring the Citadel at the front and end of the movie. That was the stuff that Warner Brothers for a while took out and then put back in again. You know, this is the kind of stuff you have to deal with when you make a movie. It's horrific, the kind of stuff that these people pull on it. You know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it makes me think about the future, because you know, it's been a big hit, justifiably so. But what I think you had going for you in the development was time. You had the time to really polish those storyboards, as you say, George going away, reflecting upon it, coming back fresh to it,
of course.
moving stuff around. If people get all excited about it now and they want another one, out in a couple of years, you won't have that. What's the plans for the future?
Well, you're right in that in the end, the endless delays on this film benefited it because it had what they call baking time. The baking time on this movie was, as you say, it gave it plenty of time to really consider what the film was about. The shooting of it, that was as hellish as you'd imagine it would be. But also because Warner's then decided they were going to add the bookends back in, they moved the release date back a year, which gave George a really great run on post-production, so he could really make that all the CGI stuff that would be added in post, but make it very sweet, so that you sort of thought, well, all right, the storm's a bit CGI-ish, but the Citadel stuff is almost like natural. Most people don't even realize that a very high proportion of backgrounds and sort of shots in the canyon with those guys, the rock rider guys bouncing up and down on the bikes. A lot of the sort of background was computer animated, but people don't even realize it. It looks so good because they're not making a big deal out of it, But what you're saying then about, you had 15 years to develop Mad Max 1 because of all the delays and shoot it and post it. The next one's got to be done in a couple of years. Is it going to suffer? Well, who knows? Maybe it'll lack that kind of sense of depth and the sense that the world is so deeply established in Fury Road. You don't know. I mean, I have read another script which George wrote with Nico, about 5 years ago. And it's good, and we'll see. I'll just see. I won't say anything about it, but I'll just say that that may be the next one he does. Who knows?
Great. Well, I've got a story question about Mad Max, which I think would be great to get from you, seeing as you obviously were so involved. Because online, either social media or even film reviews of Mad Max have pointed out that it's more Furiosa's story, which I actually always disputed in my mind. And I thought, well, I'm going to speak to the writer. I'll just ask.
Yeah, let's ask.
I mean, in your mind, does it really matter who, that it's Furiosa's story or Mad Max's story, or would you actually say, no, it's Mad Max's story all the way kind of thing?
Well, one of the big things that happened with Mad Max is that the story that you've seen, Fury Road, is the story that was written with me and George that we concocted 15 years ago. So that's it. The story hasn't changed at all, from the version that I wrote with him. But the big thing that changed was that Mel Gibson was going to be Mad Max. It was going to be the fourth Mad Max in the Mel Gibson series. Now, due to all sorts of things, Mel's meltdown and film being up and running and then collapsing 2 or 3 times, Mel had to drop out as he got older. And then they look around for another Mad Max, and then Heath Ledger was pretty much going to play Mad Max, and then he dies, And then finally Tom Hardy appears and feels like he's... I was talking to George Miller about this a couple of months ago when I was in Sydney. He said, when you think about it, who else could I cast? Who else is there? And you realise that Tom Hardy was the natural choice. And but Tom Hardy's has a different weight as an actor, I feel, to Mel Gibson. And Mel Gibson, having done 3 Mad Maxes beforehand, brings a history with him. Mel Gibson is Mad Max. If you look at the first trilogy, he doesn't have to act as if he's Mad Max. He is Mad Max. He doesn't do, he dials himself down, but he is Mad Max innately. And so Mel Gibson in the role against Charlize Theron as Furiosa is a much weightier Max. When you put Tom Hardy in there, Tom brings his own interpretation of Mad Max, but he's like a new Mad Max and isn't as weighty on that side of the of the balance. So it feels that she's stronger than him in the film, as a kind of presence. That was my understanding of why it felt a bit imbalanced in favour of Furiosa.
Well, it does a very interesting thing in terms of story, having dual protagonists, but making it work all the same. And what I really like...
Yeah, but I'm also talking about the weight. Your perception of the weight of the character in the film is that she is weightier than him. If you put Mel Gibson in there, he weighs it back over to Max.
Yes.
And that's a casting thing. And so once George had lost his main Mad Max, it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark without Harrison Ford or something. Once you've lost that, you've got to then, eventually find the right character who's going to bring his own dynamic to it. And you don't quite know what that's going to be because Tom Hardy hasn't played Mad Max before.
Yeah. But the story, I mean, as you just highlighted, it was all visually driven from the get-go. So even a character like Mad Max, he had a lot of emotional motivation that was skillfully woven in as the story progressed.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the critique that Max, if you like, is lighter in the film than he should have been. There should have been a kind of weightier, maybe more dramatic scenes or whatever. But I think that if you consider also a lot of the publicity and how the film got picked up on social media was on the feminist thing got very, I felt, overstated. In terms of the overall movie. I mean, if you just pick up she's freeing these girls from sex slavery and taking them to an idyllic matriarchal society. If you pick that bit up, that's certainly a strong part of the film, but it's not the whole film.
Yeah.
So if you consider, really, Max is strapped to the front of a vehicle for the first sort of half an hour or something. He then bests the warrior woman in a fight, takes her truck, but is persuaded to take them with him. I won't go into why, but you've seen the film.
Yeah.
As he goes along, he can't wait to get rid of them at some point, but gradually becomes invested in what they are about. We see her go to the green place that doesn't exist, so she's failed in her mission and has basically taken those girls to their death. They meet the old ladies and decide that, again, the woman, the Theron character, decides to take them all out into the wasteland and find somewhere. But Max, who's lived out there, knows that there's nothing out there. And in the end, he intervenes and says, look, the only green place I've seen is the one back there. And if you notice in the film, the actual only greenery in the film is at the top of that citadel.
Yeah.
So then it's Max who becomes the pivotal. That turnaround scene, which it comes at the end of Act 2, when they kind of agree that they're going to go back to the green place and try and get there ahead of the warlord and then defend it. So we see the warrior woman, the Charlize Theron mission ends in failure, and it's Max who takes it up and then turns it around, grasps what they're all trying to do, gives them the solution, and then puts everything he's got into bringing about, letting their mission, if you like, be accomplished, and then new societies start to form in the green place that they've just come from. And then he leaves and continues on his wandering peregrinations.
Yeah, brilliant.
But I think that's, in a way, what people are excited about with the story, is the fact that, Max, more so than just being on a hero's journey, it's all about him. He's a conduit to action. He's a provider of solutions and an enabler for people that he sees as struggling. And I think that's why people were so excited about it and felt that it was a fresh story, even though it's from a franchise that's, been around for many decades now.
But we never thought about it.
It's different.
Franchises and all that.
It's different. It's got that different flavour and energy.
Sorry, Brendan, I missed what you said there.
No, I'm just saying that we never thought about it in the fourth installment of the franchise kind of thing. That way of thinking has nothing to do with us. The reason why I love Mad Max as well, and then the Mad Max films came out. The third one wasn't as good as probably the other two, but it was still interesting, etc. But it felt to me like a franchise that hadn't been completely exploited and milked dry like Terminator and Alien. It had just been left there in the 80s and everybody had forgotten about it. So when I spoke to George and said, listen, we could, what about a new Mad Max film? What about this? What about that? Think of what it could be, blah. He's a guy with a lot of integrity about his work. And so he's not going to do something unless there's an idea in it that interests him. And so once the core idea of there's a guy breeding women to perpetuate the human race, there's a woman who dissents from that. Suddenly he's interested. There's a new dynamic there. And he told me he always wanted to do a female road warrior character. You know, the warrior woman in Mad Max 2 almost developed that character into a fully fledged Mad Max character.
Was there never a thought during all that time? You talked about Mel being attached back in the early days, and now the time that has gone past, and there's kind of, you know, Clint Eastwood's played around with it a lot. The idea of going back and looking at a character and all that time's moved on. Was there never a thought, probably because of the way it's developed, but was there never a thought about doing what does a grizzled old Mad Max turn into? Does he turn into the guy that's the villain in the story at the end? Do you see what I mean? Like, was there never a thought about that?
Well, George has said that as well. He said he wants to. He said he wants to avoid the hero who becomes the tyrant, as it's such historically inevitable that you sort of would like to try something else. Look, the thing about Fury Road is when you had Mel Gibson, and I'm talking going back 17 years to when we first talked about the story, the idea that Mel Gibson, as he was then about 40, I think he was just 40 years old then and still viable as Mad Max, the idea that he's still going to be wandering around the wasteland in a pair of black leather trousers looking for himself started to feel a bit old. And you felt like maybe it's time for him to join the human race again and be the custodian of a new society. And in the original draft that I wrote with George, which was the one that was going to be shot with Mel Gibson when it was first greenlit, he goes up in the platform at the end with them at the end,
right,
and stays part of that society because he's found this woman that, you know, you don't think he'll ever meet a woman that he could ever, that would ever be equal to him or worthy of him, and he for her. Yet in the Charlize Theron character, you feel that, okay, Max has met her, you know. With the recasting with Tom Hardy, you're not quite sure whether or not there's a sense that Tom Hardy feels too emotionally young to partner with Charlize Theron. So, you know, listen, you're kind of putting your finger on all the kind of issues that we had and that we discussed and decisions that were made. And listen, I made my decisions and argued for Mel Gibson goes up in the platform at the end and becomes part of society. So in the hero myth of Campbell, he doesn't remain in the wasteland forever. He comes back into society. Thus, you see it in modern society now, you know, alcoholism and addiction as the main people avoiding the call, going into the wasteland and then coming back in and rejoining society with the acquiring of wisdom is the kind of psychological explanation of addiction in some ways. And you know, you see it all the time. It's our Western version of initiation.
Oh, wisdom.
Hero's journey. We're getting back into screenplay stuff. I'm going to get my geek on. I just actually want to mention the character of Knox as well. I mean, what an amazing character he is. And how did that kind of develop in the story process, I guess?
Because Knox, what was great about Knox was a lot of fun because he didn't bear the weight of the big sort of themes and the big, you know, lead character dynamics. Yeah, he didn't have to carry the movie. He could be somebody who kind of goofed around a bit on the character arc because he didn't, you know. So that gave us a lot more. He was a lot more fun to write. But as the themes of the film started to become clearer, and you realise actually this film is about this now, then you want to start to make sure that that Knox reflects the core theme of the movie. And so, you know, gradually we started to modify him, and he started to then acquire the arc that he acquires, which is to move out of the hypnotized war boy state, you know, somebody who's an ideologue, into somebody who also realizes that what the girls are saying and what they're trying to do is better than what he's been in, and he fully commits to their cause too. And he knows that because he's a half-life war boy, he's not going to live for long. He knows that, you know, when he's in the truck at the end, it's up to him to crash the truck so that their vision of the green place can come about back in the Citadel where he'd come from. So, you know, he complements the theme of the movie, I thought, very well. And And that was a great bit of casting as well. I thought he really did a good job on it.
Yeah, very, very much so. But it's again, story-wise, I'm very reassured to hear you say that, in terms of reinforcing the theme that you had, obviously from an early days,
Yeah.
or maybe what Nico helped refine when he came on later
Yeah.
on. It wasn't just like, some friends of mine have seen the film and say, yeah, I loved it, but it was essentially one long car chase. And I'm thinking, no, it wasn't. What are you talking about? Did you not see
I know,
it?
that's ridiculous. Yeah, silly. No.
But in another
What
way,
they're saying, no, the form of the film is one long
Yes.
chase.
Yeah.
All right? That's one thing. And the film we looked at the most was Stagecoach.
yeah,
All right? So you would understand then how do you do a movie where where you see a lot of the dynamics are just people in an enclosed space interacting with each other. I mean, that's quite a challenge to make that interesting, which I think, we did. But, I mean, you'll see things like, I noticed stuff like Tom Hardy when he was talking with Charlize Theron in the war rig cabin as they're driving. He'll do big body turns to say something to her, and you think, okay, I know what he's doing there. He's trying to do something other than sit there talking, being a talking head.
What's next for you? That's always the question we like to kind of end on.
Okay.
It's what are you working on now? What's coming out soon? Where can we see you exciting work
In another
next?
10 years' time.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, well, my career as a graphic novelist goes on. I love comics. It's where I learnt my skills of both writing, drawing, and storytelling. So I've just finished, after the last year, a new graphic novel called Dream Gang. It's a kind of Inception meets the X-Men, if you like. Is the kind of, that's the Hollywood pitch version, the elevated pitch version. What it's about is a group of naturally gifted psychics who can travel through dreams at night, who uncover a plot by this sort of government, these dark sort of government forces, to create a meme that will travel through people's dreams at night and create a nightmare state in those people, and then cauterize the higher functions, so the spiritual and idealistic elements in human nature are removed. So you've basically got some nice kind of docile cattle who will consume what you want. So Martin Luther King won't be saying, I have a dream. He'll say, I have a special offer at Target. That's the basic idea, right? So it's about an attempt to destroy the higher functions, the spiritual, if you like, in human nature. And so it's an invasion from within. And these basically dream surfers, characters who aren't that bothered, get caught up in this. Now, all those characters these people who, like, if it's the three of us at night, we might project ourselves at the dream world and we assume kind of dream personas or avatars. And so I might go as, I say, a Batman kind character, and you say, oh, there's Brendan, but he's dressed as whatever, his dream character is so-and-so. So that's how it goes on. I've had this project like even longer than Mad Max. It's just taken me this long to get around to it, about 25 years, and I had to radically change it after Inception came out.
Yeah.
But, anyway, it's kind of become its own thing now, very different, a little bit more superhero-y and a bit more colourful. It's a bit like Yellow Submarine or something. But I can send you a link to it if you want to see some pages or whatever. If they feature.
Where should we point people to online generally for you, do you think?
Go to artbrendan.com. That's artbrendan.com, all one word. And you'll see like Mad Max production art. You'll see Dream Gang pages and basically a kind of a retrospective of my work from the earlier stage when I was doing stuff right at the beginning of what was known as the British invasion in comics, where Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, Neil Gaiman, all those guys, and myself and others, we took the American industry by storm and changed the face of comics. That was really where I first made my name. One of the interesting things is that Hollywood has picked up on comics. Comics are now huge, massive, blockbuster business. And comic book creators are now, considered the equal of any other type of creator, which has been a great achievement.
Well, I think that's part of those early days, like you say, in 2000 AD, having that as a way for those guys to cut their teeth, and get involved in.
We all did it. We all did our bit on 2000 AD.
Yeah, it's a shame not to have that sort of thing being so mainstream and available anymore. Just, do you know what I mean? Because it was saying you'd be a bit cheeky and bunk off school and get down the news agents, and do you know what I mean? It was all a bit. Sure. It's a shame those days are gone, maybe.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, the heyday of 2000 AD in the 80s and stuff, it was selling 500,000 copies and was part of the national conversation. Yeah. Now it's diminished and become, sadly, got taken over by more of the game world thing. And the trouble with, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but the trouble with gaming, video games, etc., is there's very little interaction with society as a whole. You don't find a new game coming out with a critique of this and it gets reviewed in the same way a movie or a book does. It's very much in its own little world. And 2000 AD has slightly gone into that stuff now, so it's kind of become less relevant.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that, well, because of the long lead time, that's saying that games can't seem to be right on the edge like 2000 AD used to be. It could not be topical, but it would be of the moment and talk about concerns and issues and thoughts, around society at the time, and do it quite punctually.
Well, that's right. There was a quick turnover, and 2000 AD was, if you like, the venue in the way that, say, the comedy store would have been the venue for all the upcoming comics.
Yeah.
2000 AD was that meeting place for Alan Moore and all those guys. Yeah. We didn't know each other existed until we all turned up in the same place in the same decade.
Well, let's get out of our nostalgia.
Yeah, we should probably wrap up.
And wrap it up. But it's been, very exciting to hear about visual storytelling and that different way of working. Been exciting to me, definitely.
And the inside track of how Mad Max developed and how it got to on screen. So thank you. Witness Brendan McCarthy, writer of Mad Max.
Yeah, exactly.
Witness us, the UK Scriptwriters Podcast. see you on the gates of Valhalla.
That's right. We'll see you there. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Brendan. Check out Brendan's website, as he's already talked about,
artbrendan.com.
Definitely check out Mad Max if you haven't already, but you should have read the thing at the start which will say don't listen to this if you haven't seen it, but see it again. It's out on Blu-ray and DVD and all those things, so you must get hold of a copy for your own personal collection. And myself and Danny will see you in the next podcast at some point,
and we'll just leave it to Brendan to say goodbye to everyone.
All right, thanks guys for giving me a chance. And
cheers,
I'll see you again.
All right, bye.